Chapter 21. Fishing in the Dark. The explorer hadn't moved by the time the sun rose. He lay snoring where they'd left him, a beetle perched on his chin. Max woke up first and kicked Fred in the crotch as he scrambled to his feet. Max scratched himself all over and then went running across the stone square, shook the explorer's shoulder and sat down on top of him. The explorer, startled, awake. Fred flinched, remembering what the man had said about his startle reflex, but he merely looked mildly, politely appalled. "Can I eat this?" Max asked. He thrust a handful of grass into the explorer's face. The explorer shifted Max gently onto the floor, sat up and began to blow on the fire. "No, you can't," he said. "You didn't even look." "The chances that the answer is yes are so slim." He looked up. "That's poisonous." "No." "Definitely poisonous, or only maybe?" "Definitely." "Oh, and this?" He held up the explorer's chin beetle, which had fallen on the ground. "You could eat that," said the explorer. He gently took the beetle from him. "But the Max of 2 hours from now would not thank you. As a rule of thumb, it's best not to eat things that are still moving." "But I'm hungry. It's only moving a tiny bit." "I would still emphatically discourage it." "What does that mean?" "It means no." "Oh." Max lay down on his back. He didn't cry, but his face looked blank and older than it should be. Quietly under his breath, he began to sing to himself in Portuguese. Fred scraped some dew from the leaves above him and used it to clean his face. He looked over at Max, properly looked, for the first time in days. The boy was growing thin, and his cheekbones stuck out under his eyes. Leela had worked hard to make him look cared for and clean, but he had a snail trail of snot across his face and green dust in his eyebrows. The explorer was also looking down at Max. His face was shaping itself into a peculiar expression. His eyes were bright and his mouth tight. Abruptly he rose to his feet. His voice was brisk, artificially, unconvincingly brisk. "What are all you sitting about for? Time is precious. Shouldn't you be preparing for your journey?" "But how exactly? We don't know what to do," said Con. Her voice was almost a whine. Leela shot at her a look. The explorer's face was very dry. "If you have a preference for surviving, you'll need to know how to spear fish. There have been expeditions when the men and I survived on fish for half a year." Max's face lit up. "Fish? Right now?" "Tonight. There's a small lake not far from here." "But I'm hungry now," said Max. "It needs to be dark. You can spend the day making spears." "I tried that," said Fred. He slapped away a mosquito, "but the vines I used to tie the flints on kept breaking off." "Vines?" The man looked shocked. "You don't use vines to secure a spear. That would be like using packing tape to build a steam train, idiot boy. You're using intestines. Where are the guts from your bird?" Con pointed to the jungle, where they'd buried the intestines and other rejected bits at a safe distance. "Dig them up and heat them over the fire and use them as string." He made a winding gesture, as if tying a knot. "And don't bother me until then." He turned abruptly. They were getting used to it by now, and strode away towards the far end of the courtyard, towards the tangle of vines that cut off the corner of the square from sight. They undug the intestines. They were not a pretty sight, and being buried hadn't improved them. Con washed them in half coconut, and Leela and Fred began laying them out on the stones, trying not to look too hard at the semi-translucent tubes. Max tugged at Leela's ankle. "Leela, did you hear that?" "What?" The air was silent, bar the constant whir of the insects in the trees above them. Then Fred jerked his head round. It was the same roar he'd heard before, choking through the air. "It's coming from there, from behind the vines," he said. "I'm going to go and see." "No," said Con. "He said don't bother me, and I happen to think if a person wears claws for cufflinks, you should do what he says." "But what if he's being eaten?" said Fred. "Surely then it doesn't count." Leela shook her head. "I agree with Con." Con looked round in surprise. "Really?" "Whatever it is, he doesn't want us to know, and we can't afford to make him any more angry." Leela turned and with unexpected firmness towards the fire. "Let's make those spears." Reluctantly, Fred sat down. The morning was a sticky one, and nobody smelt better by the end of it. The intestines were easy to empty, and the process of heating them over the fire to harden them felt unexpectedly medieval. "This is not how I pictured fishing," said Con. "I thought it was all old men sitting around on the riverbanks telling people to be quiet, like river librarians." Fred opened his mouth to reply, but the guts dripped and spat hot fat at his teeth, so he shut it again. He wondered if his fingers would ever lose the faint scent of dead bird, but by the time the sun began to set, he had a long-handled spear, with a flint glinting in the light. Leela's spear was strong and straight, but the wrapping around the flint had gone awry where Backer had tried to get involved in the process and covered himself in grease. Con's spear was the neatest. Her hands were competent and controlled, even with bird gut. Fred went in search of water to wash the grease off his arms. Some of the stones had hollows that collected enough rainwater to wash a small patch. He moved from stone to stone across the citadel, gradually shedding the worst of the burnt grease smell. As he came back, he heard voices. The explorer was kneeling on the ground, bent over his pith helmet. Leela crouched next to him. "You have to be gentle with the knees and elbow joints." The explorer was speaking, his voice low. "They're still very fragile at this age." Leela nodded. "I know." She reached into the pith helmet. "I can feel it when he moves. They're so light, like seagull bones." "Make sure that you check under the armpits for parasites. There." Backer's head reared up over the edge of the pith helmet, and he let out a wail of protest. The explorer gave something approaching a smile. He was being unnecessarily dramatic. The water's good for him. Now, hold him by his forearms. "Like this?" Leela lifted Backer from his bath, dripping, his legs dangling. "Yes, check his stomach for ticks." Leela checked, brushing her fingers over the sloth's belly, her eyes squinting with care. "There's nothing." Backer's fur was plastered against his skull, and his eyes were wide with the affront of it. He gave a squawk as he hung from Leela's hands. "Now you need to dry him." Swiftly, Leela unplaited her hair. It fell in an uneven wave to her waist. She lifted the sloth into it and rubbed him gently. Backer snuffled among the deep brown curls. Fred saw Con, inside the stone room, give the ghost of a smile. Max was half asleep, his head on Con's lap. The explorer raised his eyebrows. The corners of his mouth lifted a half an inch. "I doubt that particular strategy would be suggested in veterinary college, but good." The sun was dripping over the top of the statue of the panther. The explorer looked up and saw Fred watching. He sprang to his feet, as if embarrassed to be caught mid-kindness, his bad leg catching on his good one, suddenly brisk again. "Right, are you ready to go? You need each to take some fire with you. The fish eyes shine red in the light. Find slow-burning wood, something dense, or it'll burn down too quickly." They set off in single file through the dark trees, each carrying a burning branch. Backer rode, still slightly damp inside Leela's shirt. The explorer moved without a single rustle. The rest stumbled behind him, stubbing their toes on unseen roots. A branch whipped into Fred's face, and the leaves blackened in the flame of his torch, but the wood was too green to catch fire. "Don't burn the jungle down, please," said the explorer without turning round. Fred found to his surprise that the dark was no longer seemed threatening. It still made his skin tingle, but the pitch-black shadows under the trees no longer bit at his stomach in the same way. The change had been so slow, he hadn't felt it come. "There are ant mounds everywhere here," said the explorer. "Nothing too bad. The only dangerous ants are the bullet ants, but you won't want to disturb them if you can help it. I was attacked by a colony once when I was asleep. It looked like my whole body was covered in warts." "Oh," said Leela. "Wow." "Quite. Not good for the morale." They went in a new direction, northwest down a steep incline. Every time their branches burned down to their hands, they pulled new ones from the trees and lit them. Twice, Fred lost his footing and slid until he came up against a tree. Max tripped, ate a mouthful of mud, and they had to pause until his screaming died down enough for him to walk on. Leela tried to comfort him. The explorer turned away and studied a dung beetle with angry intensity. The lake, when they came upon it, was larger than Fred had expected. The trees that grew all around it had spread their roots under the water. The explorer took off his shoes and waded in, knee-deep. "Come on, quickly," he said. "What are you waiting for?" Fred followed him into the water, feeling it soak his shorts and praying there was nothing in it with teeth. The lake was pure black, except where his burning torch cast a yellow light down through the water to the mud and stones of the lake bed. On the glow of the flames, pairs of red lights flitted and flashed under the surface of the water. Max laughed, delighted. "The bigger the eyes," said the explorer, "the bigger the fish. Move slowly towards them. Hold your torch close to the surface. You lower your spear as slowly as you can into the water, and then, at the last moment, you jab. Jab fast. Don't jab your own feet. Now split up." Leela and Con exchanged sceptical glances. They moved off across the lake, but they didn't split up. Their breath was audible. It was hard to tell in the dark, but Fred thought that they might have been holding hands. Max reached out and took Fred's hand. His palm was warm and sticky. "Let's fish," Max said. Fred fumbled, trying to arrange his spear properly while keeping the flame away from his face. "If I give you the torch to hold," he said to Max, "will you try not to burn my hair off with it?" Max took the burning branch. "Maybe," he said. The spear was harder than Fred had expected. The spear was thin and supple in his hand, but every time he brought it down over a fish, the fish had gone. A swarm of mosquitoes passed over them. Max sneezed and waved his burning branch over emphatically. "Max, I think I better take the branch." "No," cried Max. No, it's mine. I'll be careful." A spear flew suddenly past them, inches from Fred's chest, and landed in the middle of the lake, its tip vibrating out of the water. Fred jumped. Max gave a yell, rocked backwards, grabbed at Fred's knees, and the two of them toppled backwards into the shallows. The branch extinguished. Fred sat up, spitting water, and looked around for Max. The explorer strolled past, picked Max up with one hand, flipped him upright, and set him down on his feet. "Are you all right?" said Fred. I'm wet," Max wailed. "I don't want to be wet." "But otherwise?" Max's face rippled as he debated whether or not to cry. He hesitated then. "My underpants are soggy, but I'm all right." The explorer picked the spear out from the mud from where he'd thrown it. "Good boy," he said to Max. On the end of the spear was a fish as big as a man's thigh. "Breakfast," said the explorer. "Come here, Fred, and learn how it works. Max, stay on the shore and guard the fish. Here, I'll give you a torch." The explorer strolled through the water to the nearest tree, pulled down a branch, lit it with his own, and handed it to Max. "Beautiful, no?" "Should Max be left with fire?" asked Fred. "He tends to eat things." The explorer turned to Max. "Boy, do not eat the fire or any other part of the world surrounding you. Do you understand?" "Yes," said Max. He was sniffing the fish. "You see, he understands," said the explorer. "Come on,